My name is Paige Whitmore. I am 41 years old. Here is what my mother believed for 20 years, that I was the one who couldn't be managed, couldn't be trusted, couldn't be counted on to behave correctly in a room full of people. Here is what was true. My name was on a building. It had been there for 3 years before she saw it. She walked past it every single day of the week my father was in that hospital, and she never once looked up. I want to be precise about what this story is and what it is not. It is not a story about a monster. My mother, Suzanne Whitmore, is not a monster. She is a 62-year-old retired reading specialist who teaches Sunday school and sends birthday cards on time and has never, in any setting outside our immediate family, been anything other than warm and well regarded by everyone who knows her. She organizes the church potluck twice a year. She is the kind of woman people describe as a blessing. I am not being sarcastic. She genuinely is those things in the world she inhabits. What she also is, and what she has been for as long as I can consciously remember, is the person who narrated me to other people, who decided early on what the story of Paige Whitmore was, and told it so many times and in so many rooms full of family and neighbors and church friends that the story became indistinguishable from the fact. She was not lying, exactly. She was simplifying. That is what made it so difficult to argue with. You cannot argue with a simplification. You can only wait until reality is complicated enough to correct it on its own. I waited 41 years. The wing has been open for 2.5. It's called the Whitmore Oncology Wing. It is on the second floor of Carver Regional Medical Center in my home county in North Carolina. The name is carved in raised bronze letters into a cream-colored stone panel above the entrance. It has been there since January of 2023. My mother drove past the hospital on Route 12 every week on her way to the grocery store for 2.5 years and never once looked at the sign above the entrance. She saw it for the first time in August of 2025. On the third day of the week, my father was in surgery and recovery after his second cardiac event. She was standing in a hospital corridor with my sister Amber, 2 aunts, 3 cousins, and a woman from her church who volunteers in the gift shop twice a week. I was there too. I had flown in from Raleigh. I want to start at the beginning because the beginning matters. Not the dramatic beginning, the quiet one, the one most people miss because it doesn't look like anything from the outside. I was born in 1984, the first child of Earl and Suzanne Whitmore of Harnett County, North Carolina. My father worked for 31 years as a county records clerk. My mother taught reading part-time at an elementary school and raised my sister Amber and me in a 3-bedroom house with a garden that Suzanne maintained with the same organized attention she brought to everything she considered worth maintaining. We were a middle-income household, comfortable, not affluent, the kind of family where the budget was real and discussed openly, and a least practical sedan was the car you drove because that was the reasonable choice. My mother still mentions her current Honda CR-V with a frequency that tells you something about the relationship between what you own and what you feel entitled to comment on. My sister Amber came along in 1988, 4 years after me. She is, by every account including my own, genuinely easier than I am. She is warm in the way I am not. She makes friends without effort. She was good at performing the family rituals, the holidays, the reunions, the Sunday dinners, the carefully managed social calendar of a small-town church community, in a way that I was not because I lacked the capability, but because I lacked the interest. I was precise and private and, by my own honest assessment, not particularly oriented toward performing emotions I did not feel. My mother experienced this as a problem to be explained, and so she explained it. July 4th, 2003. I am 19 years old. I am home from my second year at the State University, where I am studying biochemistry on a partial academic scholarship I applied for without telling my mother, because telling my mother things invited a kind of commentary I could not afford while trying to also study organic chemistry. I am standing at a cookout at my aunt's house holding a paper plate, and a family friend, a woman I barely know, a friend of my mother's from before I was born, Asks Suzanne about her daughters. Suzanne says, Amber is my easy one. Paige is my difficult one. She always has been. She says it the way you'd describe a weather pattern. Matter of fact, slightly resigned, slightly fond, the tone of someone reporting an established condition. The family friend laughs a little, uncomfortably, the way people do when they're not sure whether they're being invited to commiserate or to sympathize. Suzanne moves on immediately to talking about Amber's dance recital. I am standing 4 feet away. I have a paper plate in my hand. I do not say anything. I want to tell you what that moment felt like from the inside, because I think it is important to be accurate about this. It was not devastating. It was not the moment I burst into tears or excused myself to cry in a bathroom. I am a scientist by training, and I was already becoming one by temperament at 19, which means my primary response to data is to observe it, categorize it, and figure out what it tells me. What that moment told me was this. My mother had a story about me. She had been telling it for years, possibly, and this was the specific thing that landed with weight, without being fully aware that she was telling it as a story rather than as a fact. She believed it. That was the part that was not going to be fixable by arguing. I filed it and went back to eating my potato salad. Over the next 15 years, from 2003 to roughly 2018, the label appeared at every significant family gathering I attended. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, reunions on both sides of the family, my mother's church events when I was still in proximity to them. The vocabulary shifted slightly depending on the audience and the year. Difficult became complicated. Complicated became cold. Cold became, she's always done things her own way. The tone shifted too. Sometimes resigned, sometimes almost affectionate, occasionally something closer to genuine bewilderment, as though Paige being difficult was a natural phenomenon Suzanne had long since accepted, but still found slightly remarkable. The audiences included my father's family, my mother's family, neighbors, church friends, the parents of people I had grown up with, and at least 2 of Amber's teachers who attended church functions. I was present at most of these. I was, by definition, unable to correct the narrative without proving it. If you object to being called difficult, you are being difficult. If you correct your mother in front of her church friends, you are causing a scene. If you leave the room, you are being cold. There was no available move. I recognized this at 22 or 23 and stopped looking for one. I want to pause here because I think some of you watching this know exactly what I am describing, and I think you deserve to have it named precisely. It is not abuse in the conventional sense. There is no single incident you can hold up and say, here, this is the thing that was done to me. What there is instead is a structure, a story told so many times in so many rooms that it becomes the architecture of how everyone around you understands who you are. And the particular cruelty of it is that it is self-sealing. Any attempt to push back becomes evidence for the story. You cannot win inside the structure. You can only leave it or outgrow it so completely that the structure becomes irrelevant. I chose both. I completed my biochemistry degree in the spring of 2007, graduating with a 3.9 GPA, $8,400 in student loan debt, and a job offer from a pharmaceutical research firm in the Research Triangle. I paid off the loans in 18 months. I did not tell my mother what my GPA was. I did not tell her about the job offer in advance. I told her I had taken a position in the Triangle, that it was research adjacent, and that I would be fine. She said she was glad I had found something, and then she asked whether I thought I would ever move back to the county, and I said probably not. And she said, "Well, that's Paige," in a voice that was not unkind and not unkind, and that was the entirety of the conversation. I spent the next 5 years at the pharmaceutical firm in clinical operations. I was, as I tend to be, quiet and productive. The kind of employee who does not call attention to herself and whose absence is eventually more notable than her presence ever was. I went from $58,000 a year to $91,000 over 5 years. I saved 40% of my take-home in years 3 through 5. I opened my first brokerage account in 2011 and treated it the way I treated everything I cared about, with complete consistency and minimal drama. In 2014, I moved into biotech consulting. My income in year one was $140,000. I mention this not to impress you. I am aware that money is not the point of this story, or not the only point, but because I want you to understand the specific quality of invisibility I was maintaining. My mother had no idea what biotech consulting was. My father, who was kind and uncomplicated in the best way, and who I loved without difficulty, knew I did something with pharmaceutical companies, and was proud of me in a general way that did not require specifics. Amber knew slightly more because Amber is curious and genuinely interested in people even when they are her difficult sister. But the family, as a unit, had stopped tracking my professional life somewhere around 2014. They stopped asking. I stopped offering. The distance became mutual and efficient. In 2017, two colleagues, Renata Singh and Marcus Fells, approached me about co-founding an advisory firm. The pitch was specific: a boutique firm focused on regulatory compliance and clinical trial design consulting for hospital networks and pharmaceutical companies. At a moment when the regulatory environment was creating unusual demand for exactly our skill set. Renata had the relationships, Marcus had the operations background, I had the technical depth, and, it turned out, the appetite for the risk. I took the smallest equity stake at 28% and the most technical role. The firm was called Meridian Clinical Partners. I want to be honest about what those early years of building something felt like, because I think it is easy, especially in a story like this one, to make the building feel triumphant from the beginning. It was not. It was terrifying and expensive, and there were quarters in 2018 where I was not sure we were going to make it, and where I sat at my desk at 11 at night running projections. That did not consistently resolve in our favor. I did not tell my family any of this, not because I was protecting some long-term plan. I simply did not have the kind of relationship with them where that sharing was available or safe. The silence was not strategy. It was habit. And the habit was built from years of learning that telling them things gave them material for a story I had no control over. In 2019, Meridian's annual revenue hit $3.1 million. My distributions that year were $410,000. I was 35 years old. In June of 2019, my father had his first serious cardiac episode. He was hospitalized for 4 days at Carver Regional Medical Center in Harnett County. I flew in from Raleigh on the second day. I want to describe the hallway at Carver Regional as precisely as I can, because it is where this story turns. It is a standard hospital corridor, fluorescent lighting, linoleum in a shade somewhere between beige and gray, the low ambient sound of ventilation systems and distant intercoms that you stop hearing within an hour of arrival. My father was in a room on the third floor. My mother had been in the building for 48 hours and had done what my mother does in any environment that provides an audience. She had made herself indispensable and visible. She knew the names of the nursing staff. She had brought a casserole dish covered in foil for the nursing station, which I guarantee was appreciated, and was also 100% about being the kind of woman who brings a casserole. On the third day of my father's hospitalization, his attending cardiologist, a man in his early 50s named Dr. Anand, who was patient and clearly good at his job, came to speak with us in the corridor. My mother, who had been charming him at every opportunity for 2 days, introduced me. She said, "This is my daughter Paige, the scientist. She's never been easy to read, but she loves her father in her own way." Dr. Anand smiled politely. I shook his hand. I asked 3 specific clinical questions about my father's ejection fraction and the proposed medication protocol, which Dr. Anand answered in full and with visible appreciation for the specificity. My mother said nothing during this exchange. She stood slightly to the side. I could feel her recalibrating. The way you can feel someone recalibrating when the person they have just described as difficult proceeds to demonstrate that the description was not the whole picture. I did not correct her. I shook Dr. Nan's hand again when he left. I went back into my father's room. That night, back in the hotel I had booked because I was not going to stay at my mother's house, I called my financial advisor. I told him I wanted to make a significant charitable gift and I wanted to think carefully about the structure. He asked to whom, and I told him Carver Regional Medical Center. He did not ask why. That is one of the things I value about him. In 2020, I contacted the development office at Carver Regional. The conversations were quiet and took several months. What I wanted was specific, an oncology wing, named for my family name, specifically in memory of my paternal grandmother, Eleanor Grace Whitmore, who died of ovarian cancer in 2009, and who was, in the 25 years I knew her, the only person in my family who ever called me brilliant without a qualifier attached. Not brilliant, but not brilliant in her own way. Just brilliant. She said it to me once when I was 11, looking at a report card, and she said it the way she would have said the sky was blue, as a simple observation about the nature of things. I had never forgotten it. I had never needed to. Eleanor's name was my family's name too. Whitmore. When the wing opened, whatever anyone thought of me or didn't think of me, they would walk past Eleanor's memory every time they walked through those doors. That was the gift. Not to myself, to her. I happened to be the one who could give it. The gift was formally pledged in $21.2 million paid in 2 tranches. I paid the first tranche in April of 2021 and the second in November. Construction on the wing addition began that spring. I followed the progress through updates from the development office and through a single site visit in the fall of 2021, during which I stood in the framed-out shell of what would become an oncology unit and tried to make my mind do something useful with the feeling I was having, which was large and not entirely nameable. The Whitmore Oncology Wing opened on January 17, 2023. I attended the dedication ceremony alone. I wore a charcoal blazer and simple earrings, and I stood in the second-floor corridor and watched the ribbon cut and accepted a handshake from the hospital's chief development officer and a brief, warm acknowledgement from the chief medical officer, and when it was over, I drove back to Raleigh and ate dinner alone at my kitchen table and went to bed at 10:30. No family was present. I had not told them. I had been asked politely by the development office whether I wanted the dedication publicized more broadly. I said the local paper was fine. The paper ran a small item, page B7, below a zoning dispute story. A regional healthcare newsletter covered it in a roundup of major philanthropic gifts to North Carolina medical institutions. My mother does not read healthcare newsletters. She drives past the hospital on Route 12 every week. I want to tell you something about the 2.5 years between January 2023 and August 2025. They were not years of waiting. I was not holding my breath. I had not designed the gift as a trap. I had designed it as an act of love for Eleanor and a structural fact about my family's name, and I had let it be exactly that, a fact, sitting in the world, not requiring my management or my announcement. If my mother had looked up at the sign above the entrance on any of the approximately 130 times she drove past that hospital in those 2.5 years, the story would have changed on any of those days. She never did. I did not orchestrate that. I simply did not correct it. There is a difference. Earl Whitmore's second cardiac event happened in the 3rd week of August 2025. It was more serious than the first. A significant blockage requiring surgical intervention and a week-long monitored recovery. He was admitted to Carver Regional on a Wednesday. I flew in Thursday morning. By Friday, the waiting room on the 4th floor surgical unit had accumulated the full weight of our extended family, Amber, who had flown in from Atlanta, Aunt Dot and Aunt Renee, my mother's sisters, 3 cousins on my mother's side, and a rotating cast of church friends who came in shifts because that is what church communities do, and I genuinely respect it even though I do not belong to one. My mother was, as she always is in a crisis that provides an audience, operating at full capacity. She had the names of the nursing staff again within 12 hours. She had a system for the waiting room, who was getting food, who was getting coffee, who was making the calls to the outlying relatives. She was, in every observable sense, holding the family together in the way she has always held things together, which is visibly, efficiently, and with complete confidence that this is her role and she is suited to it. She is not wrong. She is suited to it. I sat in a chair near the window with my laptop and worked when I could, and when I couldn't, I sat with my father when visiting times allowed, and I stayed out of the organizational apparatus because I did not need to be in it, and my presence in it would have required a kind of performed warmth. I am not good at, and my father did not need me, performing anything. He needed me to sit next to him and ask real questions and hold his hand when the answers were hard, and I did those things. On the third day, Sunday morning, my mother was in the fourth-floor corridor outside the waiting room talking with Francis Pickett, who volunteers in the hospital gift shop twice a week and has known my mother from church for decades. I was inside. I know what happened in the corridor because Amber was near the door and heard it, and because Francis later told it to me directly in a handwritten note. With the innocent transparency of someone who genuinely did not understand, she was about to change the temperature of an entire room. Frances told my mother she had always wanted to mention something. She said, "Suzanne, did you know there's a wing in this hospital with your family's name on it? The Whitmore Oncology Wing? I walk past it every Tuesday and Thursday when I come in, and I always thought that must be a relative of yours." My mother told her she didn't know anything about it. She came into the waiting room. She found me near the window. The room had Amber and Aunt Dot and Aunt Renee and 3 cousins and Frances, who had followed in at a respectful distance in it. My mother said, in the voice she uses when she is asking a question and has already decided she is owed an answer, "Frances just told me there's a wing with our name on it. Do you know anything about that?" I looked up from my laptop. I said, "Yes." Suzanne waited. I did not add anything. She said, "What do you mean, yes?" I said, "I made a gift to the hospital in 2021. The wing is named for the family. I named it for Grandma Eleanor." The room recalibrated. I could feel it without looking at it directly, the specific quality of attention that shifts when a group of people simultaneously realizes that the information they are receiving does not fit the file they have been keeping. Aunt Dot, who is the more direct of my mother's 2 sisters, said, "Paige, what kind of gift?" I said, "A restricted naming gift. It funded the construction." Aunt Dot said, "Well, how much is a naming gift?" I said, "Enough to name something." I did not give the number in the room, not because I was being coy, because the number was not the point, and I was not going to let the number become the point if I could avoid it. One of the cousins, Jamie, who I have always liked, he is a straightforward person, said he wanted to see it. And the group moved, the way groups sometimes move when no one has quite decided to move, but everyone has simultaneously arrived at the same destination, out of the waiting room and down the elevator and along the second-floor corridor toward the oncology unit. I went with them. I did not lead. I walked at the back. They rounded the corner and stopped. Above the entrance, in raised bronze letters set into cream-colored stone, it read, "Whit. More Oncology Wing. In memory of Eleanor Grace Whitmore." My mother stopped walking first. She read the letters. She read them again. I watched her put one hand on the wall beside her, lightly, the way you put a hand out when you need to confirm the solidity of a surface. She is a woman who has managed her presentation in every room she has ever been in. She could not quite manage her hands in that corridor. They kept moving to the wall, to her own collarbone, to the strap of her purse. She is a woman who has spent 62 years being the one who names things. There was nothing here for her to name. The building had already done it. Frances, standing at the back of the small group, said softly, "I always thought it was beautiful." My mother turned to me. The corridor was quiet in the way hospital corridors sometimes are, sound retreating to distant machinery and far-off voices, the people near you in sharp relief against the background noise. She said, I don't understand. How did we not know this?" I looked at her. I thought about the 4th of July cookout in 2003 and the paper plate and the weather pattern voice. I thought about every Christmas and every Thanksgiving and every Easter where I had stood in a room and heard myself described to other people by someone who believed, with total sincerity, that she understood me. I thought about Dr. Anand in this same building 6 years earlier, and the corridor that looked almost exactly like this one, and the moment I had walked back to the hotel and called my financial advisor. I said, "You didn't ask. Not cruel, not triumphant, just accurate. The most accurate thing I have said to her in 20 years. No one spoke for a moment. Then I said I was going back upstairs to check on my father. I turned and walked back down the corridor. I did not look back. I did not need to. The family stood in front of the bronze letters on the second floor of the hospital. I took the elevator to the fourth floor and went back to the chair by the window and opened my laptop and did 30 minutes of work. I do not now remember. And then I went in to sit with my father, who was awake and tired and glad I was there. And we talked about nothing in particular for an hour, and that hour was worth more to me than any moment in that corridor. I want to stop here and ask you something because I have been thinking about it since August, and I do not have a clean answer. If you are watching this and you have ever been the one in your family who was labeled the difficult one, the cold one, the complicated one, the one who always had to be explained, I want you to tell me in the comments, did you ever get to decide how the story ended? Because for a long time I thought the story was my mother's to tell. It was in her language and her social world and her church community, and I had no access to those rooms. It took me until I was 41 to understand that the story was always mine. I had just been waiting for something solid enough to tell it with. Subscribe if you want to be here when I keep figuring that out, because I am not finished. My father was discharged after 7 days. His recovery is slow but medically sound. He calls me from his recliner on Tuesday afternoons, which is a new development I did not expect, and which I find, each time, unexpectedly grounding. About 3 weeks after he came home, he called on a Tuesday and said after we had talked about his physical therapy and the football season and the garden, Suzanne was putting to bed for the fall. Your grandmother would have liked knowing her name was on something that helps people. He did not say anything else about it. I said I thought so too. We moved on to talking about whether the physical therapist was any good. It was enough. It was exactly enough. Suzanne called me on a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks after Earl's discharge. The call lasted 11 minutes. I know, because I looked at my phone afterward. She said several things, and I want to be precise about them because precision matters here. She said she had been thinking about the wing and about what it meant that she hadn't known. She said, I think I told a story about you that wasn't fair. I've been thinking about that. She did not say, I am sorry I called you difficult in front of people for 20 years. She did not say, I understand now what I took from you. She said a story that wasn't fair. It is the beginning of something. It is not the thing itself. I do not know if the thing itself will arrive. I have stopped organizing my life around whether it will. I said, I know, Mom, I know you have. I meant it. It was not absolution, and it was not dismissal. It was exactly what I said, I know. I am aware that you are sitting with this. I am not going to pretend I am not. Amber texted separately 2 days after the Sunday call. Her text was longer than my mother's phone call and more direct than anything I have received from anyone in my family in 20 years. She said, I think I let her do it, and I didn't say anything, and I'm sorry. I didn't know how much you were carrying. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. Then I wrote back, thank you. I didn't know how to tell you. We had lunch in Raleigh in October. It was the first time in 7 years we had been alone together without our mother in the room. We talked for 3 hours. I do not want to tell you everything that was said in those 3 hours because some of it is not mine to put into the world. What I will tell you is that she cried and I did not, which is consistent with our history and which neither of us apologized for. And that when we said goodbye in the parking lot, she hugged me for longer than we usually do. And I let her. Frances from the gift shop sent a handwritten note to the hospital development office addressed to me. She said she hoped the family was well, and that the situation in August must have been very hard for all of us, and that she always stops to read the dedication when she passes the wing on her Tuesday and Thursday shifts, because she finds it beautiful. It is framed. It is the only thing on the wall of my home office. I look at it when the work is hard and I need to remember why I am doing it. I have been asked, by the hospital development office, by a colleague who knew about the gift, and once by a journalist writing a piece on philanthropic giving in North Carolina that I declined to participate in, whether I planned it, whether I always intended for the reveal to happen the way it happened in a hospital corridor, with my mother's church friend as the unwitting mechanism. I want to be precise about the answer. No, I made a gift to a hospital where my father had been treated and where I believed the oncology resources were genuinely needed, in memory of a woman who loved me without conditions, using my family's name because it was her name and she deserved to happen on something that helped people. The rest of it, the timing, the audience, Francis, was not mine. I did not engineer it. I simply did not correct the silence, and the silence eventually arrived somewhere. I spent a lot of years being angry that my mother couldn't see me, not constantly angry. I am not a person who sustains anger efficiently. It requires maintenance I find unproductive. But there was a low and durable anger underneath everything, the kind you forget about until you walk into a room where someone is describing you incorrectly and you feel it rise like a tide. Then I spent some years being sad about it. The anger was easier, honestly. The sadness required more precision. It required me to acknowledge that my mother was not deliberately cruel, that she had told a story she believed was true, that the story protected her from harder questions about the distance between us that she was not equipped to ask. Being sad about that is more work than being angry about it, because it requires you to see the person clearly rather than simply. Then one day, I cannot tell you exactly when. It was not a single moment. I realized I had stopped waiting for her to look. I had just started building things worth looking at. And that shift, that specific internal reorientation from waiting to building, was the only freedom I have ever actually found. Not the money, not the wing, not the moment in the corridor. The shift, that was the thing. I told you at the beginning of this that my mother was right in the end. I want to explain what I mean by that, because I am not being ironic. She called me her difficult one for 20 years, and she was right. Not in the way she meant it. Not as an explanation for why I was hard to love or hard to understand or hard to keep in the family story, without distorting something. She was right because I was the one who found it difficult to be anything less than what I actually was. That is the difficulty she was sensing. Not a character flaw, a refusal, a very quiet, very long, very unannounced refusal to be the version of me that fit the story she was telling. The wing is still there. I go to see it sometimes when I am in the county. I stop in the corridor on the second floor and read Eleanor's name in the bronze letters, and I think about her saying brilliant. Just that, just the word, without a qualifier, at a kitchen table in Harnett County in 1995. And I think about how that one word, offered without condition by a woman who saw something clearly, became the foundation of everything I built. Not all of it, but the part of it that mattered most, the part that made the rest possible. She called me her difficult one for 20 years. I never corrected her. I figured eventually the building would. Was there someone in your family who told a story about you that wasn't true? And did you ever get to decide how it ended? Because for a long time I thought the story was hers to tell. It took me until I was 41 to understand it was always mine.